So, continuing from the last lecture where we were talking about the complex dynamics of the need which are unconscious, the external pressures which are from outside which keep changing the need, and the need changes the requirement to fit in into the need of survival, and which throws challenges to the conscious mind which has to give meaning and then put in some will or intent to decide how to do certain thing or not to do certain thing, which gives it feedback, again creates a behavior which gets into a sort of feedback loop and again alters the need, and also these type of continuous changes are going on. The will may not be totally free as we were talking, but the basic requirement as we talked was a need for harmony and need to achieve whatever probably the Maslowian thing. But no change can happen, a sustained change, unless there is a dissonance, which is the misfit of your various cognitive and affective states. In between we talked of how the need for empathy can bring in some changes, but that was a slight detour. So, dissonance has been should be sufficient to shake up for a sustained change, which is transformation. The transformation, as I said, is not only just a change, but it requires a continuous hammering. And so, guilt and shame, the example which I gave should not happen, but still that triggers transformations. And interestingly, I am just bringing in a story here. If you examine we have talked about it, the way it has been depicted in our epics. There are characters who have guilt and shame, and there are characters who do not have a guilt and shame. So, maybe even when they were thinking about all the changes which people can bring in their life and the way people can move along in life, they were aware of these type of feelings. So, now look at it, if empathy and mirror neurons and everything is available for all, is dissonance, which is dependent on external or internal circumstances, should be available for all. So, this process of transformation is also available to all. So, when you say that okay, he was a great man or he was a great woman who transformed, are we saying this person was different, or are we saying that maybe he just decided? So, there is a universal possibility. If empathy is universal, altruism and sacrifice is also universal. We all know, however violent the human being may be, but still human being survives the sacrifice for the family, for the people they love. When people reach a certain amount of wealth, they feel altruistic, which is not false. So, most of them may be doing for other reasons. I am just being cynical like the modern man, modern critic. But why? Even if a person is doing for power, or is still sharing some of his wealth and knowledge, and anybody who gets out of his bed, leaves his comfort and goes on to share what he has, may not necessarily be doing it with some motive. There may be, maybe that is a need to share. So, the altruism, sacrifice is as valid a need in the human mind as violence is. So, that if these two are true, then this is also naturally true, and between the self and society, because altruism and sacrifice is sacrificing a bit of self for the society, and self will only sacrifice. So, self, a little bit of decreased self not necessarily decreased self esteem, arises from empathy. Only when you sympathy, you can just throw words and go. Empathy, you have to, as I said, you have to really identify, dissolve yourself, separate, bring out a solution. So, decrease self. So, this decreasing self is for others or society. Occasionally it may happen in an impulse, but because empathy has so many steps that it requires certain amount of decision, and decision is other words is will or intent. See how everything is falling up. Now, altruism and sacrifice, let us take this. These are unconscious need, okay, falling in the purview of emotion largely. This pushes to slight dissolution of self, sacrifice in behavior, which is monitored by empathy and which you do for society. Again it benefits self in some way, maybe reward, maybe reward system. You know all these things from different lectures, but this to do this requires a will, which is cognition. So, the journey between emotion to cognition is like this: unconscious need, in this case altruism and sacrifice, arising out of the empathy, the need for empathy which the mirror neurons are pushing. So, you sacrifice self for the other in behavior, for the society, which gives you certain benefits, maybe externally or internally as a reward, what dopamine was managing, and so you keep doing it again and again, or may not do it depending on how much pleasure you have felt. Again, sacrifice can be an addiction, you can ask me. Yeah, for some people it is. Altruism, charity, so for some people it is a. So, now you can answer, why are people going out of the way to help people? Maybe it is a kick, maybe dopamine was every time they sacrifice or they give in something, the dopamine pumps, could be. But empathy, the part of empathy comes into the emotional purview, and part of it, once you decide to separate and act and really do the behavior, comes into the purview of will and intent, which is again a purview of cognition. So, it is all fitting into place. The process, the societal institutions and rules are there, and they have asked us over years and conditioned us to invest the sense of power in certain institutions like religion, politics, marriage. People either rebel or conform depending on their level of guilt and shame. Again, we, if you remember, we talked about this in the psychobiology of vices. This seems to be the basic emotion. Depending on the level of this, people decide to conform or rebel. Both may require transformations. But what is the biggest fear? The biggest fear which induces shame and guilt is again a deep need for belonging, which gives rise to security. And obviously, when you belong, there is a harmony. So, and these things create dissonance. So, when these two compile, it can lead to anything. It can lead to change, it can lead to inner reaction to a pride in a very, very unconscious way, illness. And I can give you examples. Change we all know, transformation we are going to talk about. Buddha transformed, Gandhi transformed. There are a lot of stories in the world where people transformed. We know of pride, we can visit mythology or we can visit history, and why go far, we can examine life around us. There will be people who you will be wondering why are they behaving in a certain way. Even if they are doing something which is not making their life comfortable, which is bringing them into direct conflict with others, they would still be on and on and on. That the brain, for somehow at a point where the brain could have gone into giving in or transforming the behavior, has actually switched on to a different mode, and that mode is like pride. It is a survival strategy. It may work, not work, depends on a lot of other variables, will not go into that. We are just interested in the basic process, what is going on within the mind. The important part is this hidden part. Lot of illnesses, if you look into this branch which is called psychoneuroimmunology, it actually pins down this deficiency in the human mind of being able to fight diseases. In depression, your immunity lowers, you are not able to resist. So, this can manifest, this is a totally unconscious process, this is totally an unconscious process, this requires some amount of conscious effort. So, what you are doing? You are acting and you are defending yourself. So, remember I was talking of dissonance. Dissonance is a felt misfitting and the discomfort arising out of the friction between your various components. When people have dissonance, they, as I told you, they have a fear, insecurity of being separated, of being left alone, of the basic violation of the need for harmony. So, they have guilt and shame, then they can react, they can fall ill, they can do all these things consciously, unconsciously. But largely what are the mechanisms? When you are not feeling okay about something, what do you normally do? Because I want you to involve into this thinking process, otherwise it would just sound as some sermon or theory, and that is how the examples are from our life. When we are discomfortable, when you are uncomfortable with something, what do? You talk to, you try to sort out within yourself, or when you are in a dilemma, whether you should do this or not do this, you talk to people, family, friends, maybe talk to God at times, and suppose you have done something which was ideally by your own culture and conditioning should not have been right. Say an extramarital affair, which is a taboo all over. Rightly or wrongly is a different issue, but look at it, and then you know that this is cheating, or cheating for anything, telling a lie as a student, taking something which does not belong to you, anything. There is with so many wrongs which we indulge into, societal wrongs. Somebody may be justifying it. Dacoits would say the money, the old time dacoits and the looters, they will say that he had money, I have taken it. But otherwise a middle class man would not go and do all that. So, that has created a dissonance in you. So, you are almost torn between the guilt and shame which of the act. What do? There are many ways. You go confess, right from your spouse to your father to mother to church, anywhere you can go and confess. If you do not want to confess for some social repercussions, you look for maybe a doctor or psychotherapist, or go to a temple, to God. You could leave it to destiny, to religion. Ultimately what you are doing is you are accepting that fine, it has happened, and I am sorry. You need to say sorry to somebody, even to God, and once you have said it to God, you said okay fine, let us not bother too much, let us not rake our head into all this, and you accept and divert your mind. That is what psychotherapists will tell you. If you go to a psychotherapist, they would say, fine, it's done is done, and now let me teach you some mechanisms by which you can divert your mind and control and do all that stuff. Because if a psychotherapist does not tell you and your spouse takes you to the court, then the court will give you punishment. Even punishment is a trigger. So, depending on the intensity of consequences and what I call society's buffers, they decrease the dissonance. So, as the dissonance decreases, the pressure to transform also decreases. Does it make sense? If I am having an intense problem, intense guilt and shame, that is the point where I can trigger a sustained change, a sustained transformation. And this is not mythology or history, this is how the brain works. Because if the brain, because that point is the intense disharmony which is going on in the brain. Within, it may be a disharmony with the environment also, it may be a disharmony within itself, but if at that point the mind gets some buffer which can just take off the pressure. Okay, it is, somebody will tell you, don't worry, it is all, in India we believe all this. What India? I mean, I think the whole human race believes, in the core they believe, and that is where whether they say there is, science may say there is no God, and people may talk differently, or people may say there is no religion. Religion and God are going to stay, because they are inbuilt into your system, because they are your buffer mechanisms. Even when complex organized religions were not there, there was still some sort of religion of worshipping some stone or anthropomorphic gods, because that is how the brain has evolved. That is the story of the brain, you can't say no to that, because that is the first buffer. Okay, oh boy, I have done this, you can't say this to public, because you know, if you tell it to public, all your image will be gone. So, what they do? They will pray to God, God, I have done a mistake, go to the church, confess, come back, take a deep breath, diversify, accept, okay, what has been done is done. In India we have astrology. So, a lot of people who cannot explain the dissonance of their life, of things what are not going wrong, some marriage gone wrong, some career gone wrong, somebody falling ill, astrologers come in and they, what are they doing? They are just giving a buffer, and the buffer they give is ki, it's not your mistake, you cannot do it, because obviously they are not explaining neuroscience. The neuroscience also may tell you ki it's not your mistake, it was your unconscious impulse which pushed it. So, you can, if somebody takes you to the court, you say, what can I do? It was my unconscious impulse, and that is why will is being kept alive. You know, boss, you have a responsibility also. That is the trigger. The astrologer says it's not, it's all in the stars, and he'll make a chart and tell you. And so, you may not believe it cognitively, you may be a more evolved person to believe all this, but at that moment when your mind is looking for some place or some point where you can just offload, you will say, maybe it is possible, and then move on in life. So, your dissonance is immediately gone. But imagine if you do not have a buffer, the mind cannot remain in that sustained state of tension, otherwise the mind has to create an illness. Some people who cannot sustain this dissonance, they fall ill. That is possibly one of the origins of some of the adjustment disorders and psychiatric illnesses. They just cannot. So, the mind just gives way. It just creates some defense mechanism, goes into some different trajectory altogether. It can be it manifests in physical illness also, with the very well known triggers of cardiac or diabetes or anything. But that intense pain also for some people can bring them to a point where they think, now enough, this baggage I have, and let me change now, let me transform. So, all this what we read in history and all that, that was the moment when this person changed. And every success story, if you read a lot of these self-help books and read all these people, motivational people and anybody, I mean maybe in your life, your parents and people around you, when they are looking for what is the moment of turnaround, what is the moment of transformation, what is the moment of change. So, that is that intense pressure. I think this is something which we all are capable of, and we all are aware also. We all have felt this in some situation. Some of you who are a younger lot and maybe have not gone into the tsunami of life so much, may need some more time to realize this, but nevertheless we know when we tell a lie to our parents first time and we are rebuked for it, oh, the amount of guilt which we feel, oh, it is killer. Now, at that point of time you can decide you do not want to speak a lie, but largely something happens, the same parents who has rebuked or scolded you in the daytime, in the evening will do some pampering and say, okay, the child, let it go. Now, this let it go will let it go. So, what I am saying, that brain has this huge capacity, it has its own mechanisms of, it is like physics, it is like the quantum probabilities, and there is an observer and it takes a dimension within, and then it becomes a deterministic thing, a Schrodinger wise, or a nonlinear thing where initial change in the sensitive, the change in the initial condition may take on to a different dimension altogether. But that obviously in larger behavioral issues and the maybe that physics is working, who knows, that just at that moment, if something would have happened, life would have changed, and we all look back at our life, why did I take this decision? Oh, I should have done this. At that moment, what buffers were diverting your mind is the $1,000,000 question, and that is like that sensitivity to initial condition. So, all this is happening in the space time. So, what all is going? What is going on? Neural complexity is already there, as we have talked about it. The capability of the brain of resilience and optimize with this conflictual dynamics of the connectivity of brain to the capability of resilience and optimization, and this constructs what you are going to actually represent to your mind later on. But as I said, there is also a trigger, whether it is genetic or who will actually transform and who will fall ill and who will not be able to sustain the pressure. What decides this? Is it genetics? Is it the conditioning? Is it the intensity of the shock which the brain cells have gone into? And that determines, we all know, we all love to hear the stories of great people. We all love to hear the stories of even the villains, great villains in history. Hitler, people are being portrayed, Genghis Khan, Laden, they may have been good to some people, obviously they would not have been totally bad, nobody is totally good or bad, but they are all extra humans. And all phase and time, even our prime ministers, they appear extra human, because at that moment of transformation, who will change and who will not is a big question, but all this they determine the difference between health and illness. Illness, so there are two trajectories, you go for transformation, go towards health, come down as illness. It is all about contraction, stagnation, misfittedness, whether it is temporary or long lasting, whereas health in broader terms is growth, is expansion, is fittedness, its flow. All this creates harmony, which is the basic need, whether in hierarchy or at a given in a cross section or in a longer term, and this is disharmony. Illness is, in one way, if you look at it broadly, is disharmony. But that extra human, how can he push? So, the American Psychological Association suggests 10 ways to build resilience. Resilience, as I talked about, is one of the very important thing, which sometimes help people to bounce back to normalcy, but at other times maybe not conducive to transformation. Maintaining good relationships with close family members, to avoid seeing crisis or stressful event as unbearable problems, to accept circumstances that cannot be changed, to develop realistic goals and move towards them, to take decisive action in advanced situation, to look to the opportunities of self discovery after a struggle with loss. This I think there is a problem with color. Developing self confidence, to keep a long term perspective and consider the stressful event in a broader context, to maintain a hopeful outlook, expecting good things and visualizing what is wished, to take care of one's mind and body, exercising regularly. Now, this is from psychologists, because obviously they have to tell you better ways to adjust, to be resilient, that you suffer a shock and you bounce back. Whether you bounce back and you transform is a different ball game. You can bounce back to the same mainstream and be resilience is a capacity to sustain shocks in broader terms, but there are other ways. Some of them have come from, all of them have come from Asia. Gandhi, Buddha, Christ, there are a lot of them in mythology who have mastered the trick of conversion of guilt and shame. We will stop at this and try to think over before the next lecture whether resilience, I want you to do this exercise, whether resilience is actually useful for transformation or not. And also try to now look at the composite picture of where will is placed, where cognition is placed, where emotion is placed. Broadly, you will know that at the end of the day you would have linked most of them. So, in the next lecture we will just briefly discuss it more, and the last two lectures we will try and give you some examples of it. Thank you.